Hello and welcome all. My name is Rebecca Painter, and I am the Associate Director for the Textbook Publishing team here at UAGC. I will be the host of this session, Creating Personal Connections and Belonging Online. I'm really excited for this session and pleased to welcome Dr. Daisha McCoy, who is an Associate Professor at an online program at the University of Cincinnati. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation. We will have some time for Q&A at the end of the session, but I also encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. I also want everyone to know that we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, without further delay, I'm pleased to turn it over to Dr. McCoy.
Well, thank you so much. As Rebecca said, I'm Daisha McCoy, and I'm coming from Cincinnati by way of the University of Cincinnati. And just to give some kind of context, I think sometimes people give, teaching ideas, teaching philosophies, and sometimes it's nice to know what their classroom looks like. So you have an idea of like what might need to be adjusted for your own application. So I teach solely online. I teach online graduate students, and it's considered at our university a large enrollment class, which for us means about 80 to 150 graduate students in the course. And I am blessed to have some teaching assistant support to support students, but also help with some of that grading load. And I'm an educator faculty. That's 12 months. So I teach 4 classes, fall, spring, and summer. So you'll probably see some of that context as we move forward with the presentation. So I don't need to tell this audience the importance of student-faculty interaction. There's definitely research out there, but I think this presentation ties in really nicely as they were kicking off this conference and we were looking at specific objectives for the conference because there are definitely some barriers. And I think this presentation specifically came about as a way to address some barriers. So, being an online faculty member, I wanted to increase student-faculty interactions, but there was definitely this barrier of feasibility. And some of the best practices being suggested, or even tools that were available to me, weren't necessarily practical for me to utilize. So I was looking for something that was personal. Some of the systems at the university level, we could do like grade flagging or grade check-ins, but they were cumbersome for large enrollment courses because you had to do it individually, and they weren't personal. You had this template that you couldn't modify, and you just kind of checked these boxes, and these are my concerns. So I wanted something, a way to interact with students that was more personalized. I've already touched on this, but feasible within the large scale classrooms. Is something that like my TA could also, or my teaching assistant could also support me with. And then also accurate. So yes, you can like copy and paste, you can move things from one place to another, but I'm human, we're all human, and there are going to be mistakes, really with anything we do, but trying to minimize those as we do this like scalable approach to student-faculty interaction. So those were kind of the things I was looking at. How do I support students, increase that student-faculty interaction in a feasible, personalized way? So I came across this concept of mail merge. I am not going to pretend like I invented it. This is not a novel idea, but for me, it was a novel application and something that a lot of the faculty in our program, our school, our college really wasn't utilizing. So, really what a mail merge is, it's this ability to send customizable bulk emails. So I could take data from different places. I can put it in an Excel spreadsheet. I can have my Word email, and I can customize that based on specific students. And then I can just send it all out with one click. So, and it's accessible technology. For us and most people, I think at this point, we have access to Excel, we have access to Outlook, email, and Word documents. So it was using the tools that I have um, to reach a lot of students with pretty minimal effort. So I am not given much time here. So going through like a workshop of how to do a mail merge is beyond the scope of this presentation. But I mean, there's some great tutorials out there. So the first QR code you're welcome to use. I think we might also throw the links in the chat for you. It's just a nice tutorial on how to use Microsoft to send bulk emails. The QR code in the middle is how to use Microsoft Power Automate. And I'm going to say, I'm going to be really transparent. This is not a tool that I've used, but I've kind of heard it's like the newer version of MailMerge. And there's a resource there if you want to skip and go to that tool. And then the final QR code is it's the directions that I use to teach my teaching assistants how to use it. It has some tips, lessons learned. If you're having like a formatting issue, this is what I have found to like tweak it. And it also has some template examples of how I have used mail merge with my students. So you are welcome to use it, modify it, make it better, and then send it back to me so I can also like incorporate some of those things. But definitely use that to your advantage. Okay. All right, so how I have personally used it, this is kind of one of those things where it's like IA or AI, like how can I apply this to me? So I personally use it for semester check-ins with my students, and I will have them give me information kind of throughout the semester. So on a beginning of the semester check-in, one of the questions I have is, what's your preferred name? What's a personal goal that you have for the course this semester? And so I'm able to pull that in our LMS later when I go to do this check-in. I pull their current grade and some possible supports. So they would get an email from me and it would say, hi, Rebecca, we're this many weeks into our semester, and I know that one of your goals this semester is such and such. From what she had said earlier, you currently have this grade, and here are some ideas that you could possibly use to help you reach that goal, or to bump your grade, or whatever that might be. And then reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. And so it's just pooling information that we have access to and sending it to students in an email from me that's somewhat personalized. And I have a different template for a student that might have an A, which is very, you're doing really great. Let us know how we can continue to support your success, versus a student that may have a C that we have concerns for, right? And so we can kind of change that wording some. And I typically have 3 different templates that I send out to students according to where their grade falls. However, there's other applications. Dr. Trevor Bazette, he was a former colleague of mine, and he's actually who introduced me to this idea of mail merge. And he was using it to he was a math instructor of large enrollment undergrad courses, and he was using it to provide assignment feedback. So he would export student responses, and he knew there were typical mistakes based on certain answers they gave. And so he could plug in what type of feedback he would like to give specific students based on their answers or their assignment, and then he could send that out to the whole class to give individualized feedback. You could also send out unique links or prompts to students. It's a way to connect with alumni or graduates. And so really it is just trying to think through your specific situation. Who is it that you want to create community and support and belonging with? And what information do you have? What information do you need? And how can you utilize this tool? So Some strengths that I have found, simple technology, like I said, we're comfortable sending emails, we're comfortable with Excel. We just have to learn this process of merging it together. It's customizable. You can use it however you want and however creatively you can think of. And it's opportunities to connect. So we know that one of the barriers is that we tend to wait for students to approach us when they have concerns, when they're feeling disconnected or need additional supports. And this is a way for us to initiate that connection, that opportunity for communication. And so, it was pretty low stakes, but definitely I was able to connect with, hundreds of students a semester through this. So some tips and tricks. Think strategically about the information that you want to include and how you can easily compile it. So for me, I might just tag on a question to an assignment that they're already receiving. So I can use that information later to follow up on with them. Allow some time for that cleaning up of that Excel spreadsheet, no matter how fabulously and intentionally I might word a question, and I'll give them an example response, share your preferred name, such as Dacia. I still have those students that are going to say my preferred name is Dacia. And so you're going to have to clean that up so that you only have Dacia in your cell there. There's also some formatting. Some things get a little wonky in Excel when you export it. You'll want to make sure you check for alignment. So sometimes students might withdraw from the course, and so some of your responses might get misaligned. So double check that. There's a preview feature where you can check what the formatting is going to look like, and I strongly encourage you to use that. And then in my directions, there's some other formatting tips. All right, so I'm not going to dig too deep into data, but just overall, I do tend to ask students what they felt about some of these supports. This is just 2 of my classes, just to give you a snapshot. So the white section and the black sections are that they found it beneficial or very beneficial to have these grade check-ins for me or my teaching assistant. And so I think one's at 83% and the other's 90%. And that's pretty typical student response. So I definitely count that as a win. And if you think about it, so some students weren't sure if it was helpful or found it not helpful. And we know that there's a group of students that are doing well, or they're very comfortable checking their own grade, for example. And so maybe they don't need this level of support, but I don't think it harmed anybody. So here's some examples of student feedback. I'm not going to read this to you, but I did highlight a few things where students found it beneficial. Some students encouraged having a mandatory component, such as having them respond to a survey to make sure that they engaged with this check-in in some way. The student felt that it was personal. They wanted to have additional contact. So once that connection was initiated, they wanted to then have a video conference, which of course is always available to them, but maybe making that explicit within that exchange, I think is a good suggestion. The student felt like that I was interested in them as an individual, while somebody else also felt that it was computer generated and generic. So think through your prompts, and it was a mail merge. So how can we keep it as personal as possible? A couple other things, I never know when students are going to need mental health support. So that's a support that I typically embed in my communication. And so they found that that was beneficial. Another student had never had a professor reach out to them in an online class like this. And so, I think that's powerful. I think it's powerful feedback. And while another student doesn't remember the email, because they weren't concerned about their grade and they probably overlooked it. So I don't think this is going to be like a catch-all, but for those students that find it helpful, I think it's a pretty low ask, or a pretty low task. So I zoomed through that, And if you have any questions or thoughts, thank you, Rebecca, for throwing that into the chat. I would love to answer them. I'll give people a couple minutes here. Can they unmute themselves too, Rebecca, to ask
Yes,
questions?
I was just going to
Okay.
say, feel free to come off mute or feel free to ask your question in the chat. Daisha, I'm curious what the learning curve for this process was for you.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I teach my teaching assistants how to do this. I have it kind of a task list, if you will. I think the biggest thing is learning the features within your version of Outlook and Word. But once you get your first Excel spreadsheet cleaned up and ready to go, after that, it's a pretty seamless process where you're just updating the information with maybe updated grades or something like that. But I would give yourself some time on the front end to make sure things are cleaned up and ready to go. But it's definitely, it's definitely something that I've had multiple teaching assistants with varying comfort levels of technology be able to figure out how to do. Any other questions? Can anybody think of applications that they might be able to use something like this within their classroom?
We found with our live learning participants, kind of bringing the asynchronous or the synchronous into our asynchronous environments, that the numbers are higher for student participation if they receive an email reminder, usually from the chair or whoever's teaching the course. But that's a heavy lift each week for someone to go in and pull the names and do all that. So I could see how this would lend itself to, something that's not extremely personal to begin with. It's more of just an outreach and a reminder than a personal communication, which might be useful for us.
Thanks for sharing. Susan asked, how many responses from students via email do I get? And that's always an interesting question, because I think sometimes the students you hope to hear from the most aren't necessarily the students that respond, but we get a pretty big response. And I will say a lot of those responses are from students maybe on like the cusp of an A, who we wouldn't necessarily flag typically, because I used to just like reach out to those students that were at risk. And so as those students that we might think are still being successful, that would reach out and say, oh, thank you so much. I hadn't thought of using this resource. And they're looking to bump up their grade further to reach their goals that maybe aren't being connected with as often as some of our students with concerns. So I haven't looked. I probably should look to see what like the percentage of responses are. But it is a pretty good response rate. And I also like it because a lot of times it is just a student saying, thank you so much for connecting with me. This made my day, right? We don't get enough of those emails. And so they're not all like really heavy emails. Some of them are really nice to receive too. So I definitely think if 80% of my students are finding it helpful, then that's something that I'm going to try to prioritize. Yeah, so I do include advisors, and when I have the teaching assistants send those out, I have them include me also. So when the student responds, they're reaching out to the advisor and the teaching assistant and myself. So regardless of what that concern is or that need is, one of us can typically tag team it. And the advisors are sending out their own like grade alerts, but this is kind of again, the intention is to create connection and a sense of belonging within the classroom. So there's another question. Have I thought about doing this as a program level for students in a major? And I have not. But I think it could be really helpful. I think we would have to think through just that step of multiple faculty pulling their information. But I think, especially if you're trying to do like a program level sense of belonging, right? Like let's all work together to plan this event, or we're looking for feedback as a program. I think that would be a excellent way to do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it could definitely help. Well, you have been wonderful. Where are we on time? I think we're right
Yeah,
about
I think
there.
we're about out of time. Daisha, just as the last question, I know that one of your students, talked about it being computer generated. Have you, I mean, is that kind of the only negative feedback you've received, or have most students kind of on that positive side that you showcased?
Yeah, I will say the vast majority of students respond really positively. I have had a couple students, and it's kind of like semester specific. I've done this for a couple of years now and had never really received too negative of feedback. But one semester, I had multiple students reach out and they were saying, I'm not concerned about my grade. Should I be concerned about my grade? And it almost like increased some anxiety for them, which surprised me and was clearly not the intention. So what I started to do was send like a follow-up class announcement and say, hey, we sent out, check-ins with you, and just kind of gave some context of why we were reaching out and that we were reaching out to everyone, so that some students didn't feel like they were being targeted, even though when I looked back at those specific students, we tried to word that in a really positive way. We're here to help you, whatever you may need. But they had kind of reacted in a anxious way. And so I think just taking that feedback and then just tweaking what you're communicating, giving some context to students is always helpful. Someone said they usually add all class email when sending a bulk email. And I think that's a great tip. It's trying to like find that balance, right? Like you want it to feel personalized, but also you're not being targeted necessarily, right? We're trying to meet you where you are. So I think just being anytime you can be transparent about your intent, I think it can go a long way for students.
That does sound like the type of student I would have I would have been.
And if it's the
Um,
first email you've received from a
right.
professor telling you what your grade is, I could see that being alarming, where I'm really just trying to, um, you know,
Yeah,
open a door for communication.
absolutely. Any final thoughts before we close out?
No, I just appreciate you investing in your, students, and however you connect with students. It's just so important. And I think this idea of helping everybody feel this sense of belonging, whether you're faculty or students or support. It's so important. And I look forward to seeing you in future sessions, because what I've seen so far has been really wonderful. So thanks for including me.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And thank you to the audience for your participation in today's session. Sally provided a survey in the chat, and you can use that to nominate TLC presentations for conference awards and share your feedback on this presentation. Um, Thank you all again, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Dr. McCoy.
Absolutely. Have a great one.